Hi, everybody. It's Ricky Heller here from rickyheller.com. And I write a blog at rickyheller.com where I talk about foods that are free of gluten, eggs, dairy, and refined sugars. And I post recipes and health articles there. And I also coach people to learn to love their diets if they're eating that way on a so-called restrictive diet, because that's the way I've been eating for, the better part of 15 years now. So today I want to talk about my favorite low glycemic sweeteners, because obviously that's part of a refined sugar-free diet. And I think a lot of people have trouble with some of these because, as you know, we eat so much sugar in our society, and switching away from that can be a bit of a challenge for people. So I want to talk about the ones that I like best. Now, I only use low glycemic sweeteners, so I'm not going to talk about some really wonderful natural sweeteners like maple syrup or agave nectar or brown rice syrup, just because they're not part of a low glycemic diet, in my opinion. And I'm only looking at natural, healthful sweeteners. So I'm not going to talk about things like sucralose or aspartame either. I know some people are okay with those. I personally am not. So I'm just going to run through these. I did a great Periscope that got didn't get saved. So I'm going to talk about this today instead. So what I want to talk about first, number one sweetener, in my opinion, for low glycemic healthful diet is, and I don't want to play favorites here, so I'm going to hold up two brands, Stevia. So this is New Naturals, and this is Sweet Leaf. And then there's another brand that I do use on occasion now. So, and I will just start by saying I have nothing to do with any of these companies. I have written about them on some of them on my blog, but this is not a sponsored video. So this is just what I use every day. So stevia is a sweetener that comes from stevia, the Stevia rebaudiana plant. And what often happens when you see processed stevia, it would be presented with fillers or other kinds of sweeteners to create blends. And so when you see something that says it's stevia and you can use it 1-for-1 instead of sugar, you know that it's been somehow processed or combined with something else. Pure stevia extract is going to be either in a liquid form or a powder form. And the beauty of stevia is it's 0 on the glycemic index. So it does not impact blood sugar. It's up to 100 times sweeter than sugar. So you don't need very much when you use it. And it's natural. You can grow stevia plant in your yard. And for the purists, we also have just like a green stevia powder. So this is as natural as you can get when it comes to stevia. This is just the leaf that's been dried and pulverized. But I will warn you, the leaf has a little bit of a stronger flavor. So let me just talk a little bit about objections to stevia. And a lot of the times, like my husband will say, I don't want stuff with stevia in it. It has an aftertaste. It doesn't taste good to me. And then I will make something that has a combination of stevia and maybe one other sweetener, and I won't tell him. I know, terrible. And he will eat it and he will love it. So what's the moral of the story? Treat your friends and family like children. No, they need to understand that if you use stevia appropriately, it can taste delicious. So I think the main problem a lot of people have with stevia is they overuse it, because as I said, we are kind of conditioned to believe that we have to have incredibly sweet things in our life every single day, and I'm certainly guilty of that. And so with stevia, if it isn't, we try to sweeten it so that it's going to be equivalent to something that we're used to, like ice cream, brownies, cake, whatever, and we end up using too much stevia. So you can go overboard. Sorry, my nose is itchy there. You can go overboard with stevia. And so if you use a little bit too much, there's a very fine line between perfect and overdone with stevia. So my motto with stevia is always less is more. You might have heard me say that before. Less is more. Start with less than you think you're going to need, and then slowly amp it up, maybe drop by drop. Because as I said, 100 times sweeter than sugar, 5 drops of stevia is equivalent to about a teaspoon of sugar. And 1/4 teaspoon of stevia is about 1/4 to 1/3 of a cup. Half a teaspoon is about 1/2 cup of sugar. At least that's the way I tend to use it. And of course, it will depend on the brand of stevia too. Things will change depending on the brand of stevia. So that's my number one, is stevia. I just love it. My number two, second favorite sweetener, and again, nothing, this isn't necessarily the brand I always use. There's Xyla Sweet is a good one. The other brand, which I don't happen to have a bag of right now, is called Xyla XYLA. And depending on your food sensitivities, your philosophy of food, you could choose one over the other. So xylitol is what they call a wood alcohol, or a sugar alcohol, sorry, sugar alcohol. And the beauty of sugar alcohol, so that the etols are the sugar alcohols, erythritol, xylitol, mannitol, and they are a form of sweetener that we cannot fully digest in our digestive tracts. So what happens is when you eat them, you're not able to completely absorb them, and so you don't absorb the calories either. Beauty. So with something like xylitol, you're only getting about a third of the calories of sugar. Just quickly to go back to stevia, you're getting 0 calories. So that's also why it's my number one. So if you're a baker, though, stevia can be a bit of a challenge because it's often a wet sweetener. You have, like I said, 1/4 of a teaspoon of a wet substance to replace, say, a cup or a half a cup of a dry white substance. There's going to be a bit of chemistry going on. You're going to have to learn to compensate and balance and so on. With xylitol, for the most part, you can use it 1-for-1 instead of white sugar. So if I have a family recipe that I want to redo, I can just take the xylitol and replace the sugar. And then, of course, that doesn't account for the taking out the eggs, taking out the gluten, taking out all the other things. That's a whole other operation. But if you're just looking to replace the sugar, you can use xylitol 1-for-1 instead of sugar. And the caveats with xylitol are, a lot of people will say xylitol is grown on corn for the most part. Well, if you're into health food and you've been reading the news and you're following along with all the news about genetically modified organisms or GMOs, you know that corn is one of the top GMO crops. So you don't really want to be eating a lot of corn, even if you don't have a corn allergy. The Xylo Sweet that I just showed you is certified non-GMO. So that's why I'm okay using that one. However, if you have any kind of issues with corn, say you have a sensitivity or an allergy, then I would use Xyla, which is made from North American hardwood. So it's the only xylitol, as far as I know, that is not grown on corn and that is guaranteed to be made from wood. It's either birch or hardwood. So a lot of people are much better with that. And xylitol, despite the name, I mean, sounding like some kind of weird chemistry experiment or alternately some weird kind of instrument that you're going to play in a punk band, the xylitol is relatively natural. So it is that you could conceivably create xylitol at home from corn or from birch because it's grown on it like a bacterium. So it's possible, and from what I've read, there aren't health issues with xylitol except for the same health issues that you will experience with any of the sugar alcohols, which are potentially a little bit of digestive distress, a little bit of gas, a little bit of bloating, and not gloating. You don't want to be gloating when you eat xylitol, unless you're like, oh, I'm not eating sugar, I'm so much better than you. Then you could be gloating. Otherwise, you're bloating. And a little bit of diarrhea for some people. I say that so matter-of-factly. Obviously, it's no fun if that's you. So the rule with xylitol is introduce it slowly and introduce it in small amounts and see what happens. I haven't had that issue with xylitol at all. I have had that issue with erythritol, which is another sugar alcohol that I'm going to talk about in a sec. So for me, xylitol is just fine. And the beauty of xylitol for me, as someone who's been dealing with candida for so many years, is that xylitol potentially fights candida. It prevents the candida from reproducing. At least some studies have said that. So therefore, xylitol is a boon for anybody with candida. The one tip I will give you for xylitol, though, it has no aftertaste. It's delicious. It's white like sugar. However, it's a very large granule. It looks kind of like rock salt, almost like kosher salt. Have you seen those, the kind you get on pretzels? And so if you just measure it and pour it into your baking, you're going to end up with little granules throughout your baked good. And if you have like a chocolate chip cookie or something like that, it's going to taste like you're eating crushed sand in your cookie. Not the most pleasant thing. So what I always do is I whir it up in my coffee grinder or spice grinder first. I just grind it into a powder and then I add it to the rest of the recipe. So that's my tip. with xylitol. So while I'm on the sugar alcohols, I want to show you, just recently this started showing up everywhere in stores here in the Toronto area, Lacanto, which is, that's just the trade name, I guess, the trademark name for this product. But Lacanto is a mix of two things. It's a mix of erythritol, which is a sugar alcohol, as I said, and monk fruit, which is also known as Lohango, which is a fruit from China that is very, very low glycemic and that doesn't really impact blood sugar, but it's sweet. So the Lacanto, what it does to try to mitigate those effects of the erythritol, as I said, some people have problems with digestion or bloating or diarrhea. They combine it with the monk fruit, which is 0 on the glycemic index and is much more digestible than erythritol. And apparently you can measure that 1 for 1. The one thing I will say about Lacanto, how big is this? 235 grams. So not too big. It's in ounces. It's 8 and about 8 1/4 ounces. I would say there's maybe 2 cups of Lacanto in this. And the price for this was, I think, $13 or $14. Yeah. So I wanted to buy it so I could try it, so I could tell people what it was like. But on it, I mean, my feeling is you can get erythritol, you can get monk fruit separately. Put them together yourself. It's a great product, and if you don't have the time or the inclination to start fiddling, go ahead and use it. I would even recommend that for someone on an anti-candida diet because, again, the monk fruit has been shown to be relatively safe for somebody on an anti-candida diet. So those are really 2 of the major dry sweeteners. Some more wet sweeteners, and again, this is going to be like my 3rd favorite, number 3 on my list anyway, is Yacon Syrup. And I learned something new about Yacon Syrup when I bought this bottle. So Yacon Syrup comes from a tuberous plant, like a root, and it's extracted from the plant. Sort of, I would draw the analogy to how maple syrup is extracted from the maple tree. It's basically the sap. But the thing about Yacon Syrup, it's very high in inulin, which is a prebiotic which feeds the probiotics in your body, so that's great. However, and it's very low glycemic as well. And I've always thought that Yacon Syrup has a flavor that's kind of halfway or a combination of molasses and apple cider vinegar. So it's got that sort of dark, dense, aromatic, slightly molassesy flavor with a little bit of a tang that you would get from apple cider vinegar, which is very nice. I wouldn't use Yacon Syrup on its own as the only sweetener because, first of all, it's not as sweet as sugar or stevia or xylitol or any of those. It's much less sweet to the palate, but it's also very expensive and has a flavor, whereas xylitol, stevia, and even the Lacanto on their own, they don't add a flavor to the thing that you're cooking. Yacon Syrup will add its own flavor. That said, like Yacon Syrup has traditionally been around 25 on the glycemic index, in the 20s up to 28, and even as low as 0 in some cases. This one I didn't realize until I received it because I ordered it online. It says sweet Yacon Syrup. Yikes. So this one has 14 grams of sugar per 2 tablespoons serving. That is not traditional Yacon Syrup. So I'm not sure how they process this one, but that's the warning I would give you for Yacon. When you look for it, be sure you're getting traditional Yacon, or look at the nutritional label and make sure that it's low sugar. It doesn't have that high of a sugar content per tablespoon. I mean, you can still use it, but you'd have to use a lot less. And so I'm always going to combine my Yacon Syrup with stevia or xylitol. Just a couple more I wanted to mention. So I talked about stevia. This is a great product that comes from New Naturals as well. They have cocoa syrup and just sweet syrup. They have a clear one. They have cocoa syrup and mint cocoa syrup. These are great. You can even use them straight on things like ice cream or pancakes. They've done all the blending for you, and it's just like a thick chocolate syrup. And I will sometimes use that in recipes. If I have, for instance, I have a great recipe for fudgy chocolate mint cookies in my new membership club called The Sweet Life. So one of the recipes I'm going to be sharing with the members are these grain-free fudgy chocolate mint cookies, and those will use the mint syrup as one of the ingredients. So it can add a delicious flavor, and it can also add a nice chewy texture to things because it has that same texture as like a chocolate syrup, which is great. this next one, I know no one really, we wouldn't think of this as a sweetener per se, but this is glycerin, vegetable glycerin. And if you go looking for this, this is the only brand I've been able to find here in the Toronto area. If you go looking for this in the supermarket, in the food section, you'll be out of luck, because at least here in Canada, this is classified as a cosmetic. Yes, so it's in the cosmetic section. And I don't know if you can see. It's just a clear liquid, right? So it's just a clear liquid. It's a little bit slippery, and it's like a syrup. And apparently, the way they discovered that vegetable glycerin was sweet was during an experiment. Some laboratory scientist was doing something with glycerin, and it got on his fingers, and somehow he inadvertently, I don't know, he bit his nail or whatever. He tasted it, and he realized it tasted sweet. And then they thought, oh, well, maybe on some level we can use this. So glycerin is added to some ingredients at this point. Some of those syrups that I just talked about contain glycerin as an ingredient. I can think of at least one high-protein snack bar that has glycerin as an ingredient. But this has only been happening in recent years. Up until like 2 years ago, glycerin was considered purely for exterior use only, as a hand, cream, or as part of cosmetics. But if you want to use it, I would use it judiciously, and be absolutely sure that whatever glycerin you buy is either pharmaceutical grade or food grade. You've got to be sure of that. Otherwise, I certainly would not put any of it in my mouth. Okay, the last one, and I don't have both kinds, but I'm going to show you the sugar. Coconut sugar. This is a relatively low glycemic dry sweetener. You can also get coconut nectar, which is a liquid version from the same plant, from coconut palm. And it's a brown sugar that looks sort of like brown sugar. It's a little drier than brown sugar. So, when you pack brown sugar, it will stick together because of the molasses in it. Coconut sugar isn't quite as moist, and it also isn't quite as sweet. So people will tell you that because it's a dry sweetener, you can use it, exchange it 1 for 1 instead of sugar in recipes, and you can. But I have found that coconut sugar is not quite as sweet as sugar. So I always use a little bit more. I use about 1 cup plus another 1/4 cup. If the original recipe calls for 1 cup of sugar, I use 1 1/4 cups of coconut sugar. The beauty of coconut sugar is it's a more natural sweetener. It hasn't been refined to the same extent. It still contains nutrients in it, which of course white sugar does not. The only thing white sugar contains is refined sugar, which is going to spike your blood sugar levels, which is going to acidify your body. It's going to lead to all kinds of chronic illness if you eat it over the long term, as I did. And I'm still dealing with the effects of long-term high sugar consumption, even though I've been on an ultra clean diet for 15 years. So I'm going to say this probably over and over in videos. Let me be an example to you. Do not do that. You want to quit it while you can and still regain your health without having to go through what I went through. So coconut sugar is a great alternative. It has a beautiful sort of caramely, butterscotch, buttery flavor. It's very mild, and it will add flavor and it will add sweetness at about a rate of 75% as much as sugar. So those are my favorites, and that's how I would use them. The dry sweeteners are great for things like baking, where you're replacing other, sort of refined white sugar in recipes. And then the liquids require a little bit more compensation, where you would need to increase your dry ingredients and reduce your wet ingredients in whichever recipe you're using the stevia or the coconut nectar or the Yacon or the glycerin. And I talk a little bit about how to do that in the 2nd chapter of my book, Naturally Sweet and Gluten-Free, where I talk about all the substitutions and how to rebalance if you're revamping an existing recipe and you want to use, say, coconut sugar in place of white sugar, or say agave in place of white sugar. There are different formulas that you can use, and they're pretty standard. So you can find stuff online as well that will tell you what ratio to use if you're replacing the white sugar with one of those. Okay, so I hope that was useful to you today, and I hope if you haven't, that you do try some of those low glycemic sweeteners. It's a great way to increase the healthfulness of your diet without decreasing the enjoyment or the sweetness of your foods, and that's really what it's all about. You want to still enjoy your foods. If you're looking for more help and more support to learn how to eat in a way that tastes just as delicious as the way you've been eating so far, I do offer one-on-one coaching, and I'm going to be opening up my membership club called The Sweet Life in October. And that's a place where people can find support and information and education and recipes every single month that are all free of refined sugar and eggs and dairy and gluten. So I hope you'll join me there. And if you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, 2 thumbs up, and share it with your friends if you think this information would be useful for people. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and I will see you next time. Take care. Bye.